So, why are bass players really bad at improvisation, right? Which is the truth. It's like when we very first, and I'm not including bass lines in this to begin with. So let's say soloing. So if you were to get somebody and then just say, oh, just play as a solo line, most of the time you're not going to do very well. If you said play a melody, just make up a melody, you'd probably find that quite tricky as well. If you said, could you just make up a bass line, you might have a better idea. You know, if you've been playing a lot of bass lines that sound like this. That gives you a set of notes, you know, that you've played a lot of times. Or maybe, let's say that you've been playing bass lines that sound like that. Well, a lot of the bass lines that you're then going to come up with are probably going to rhythmically be a little bit like that. They're going to melodically be a little bit like that, because you know that that kind of works for the thing that you're trying to make up. So if you've got that octave pattern, you know that, you know, you've got an octave there. You know those notes. You know kind of what they're going to sound like. You know that if you've got this, that flat 7 to the 7, after playing lots of bass lines that have got in there, you're kind of going to know that that's what they're going to sound like. So if you're playing, you've got a rhythm kind of like that, and then you know that you can put in, you're going to know what that's going to sound like. Right? And it's all about that, just gradually over time, building up a lot of stuff. So if you've played a bass line that goes, it means that then when somebody says, oh, can you make up a bass line, you've now got and then you might want to put in, stick that on the top, you know. And if you know that you've got these three notes down at the bottom, the B flat, the B, and the C. I'm in C7 here. So if you've played that a lot of times, adding those in, it's just another little few notes that you can add in. So now you've got, you know, you just start adding more and more in, so you've got more stuff to draw from. So yeah, so that'd be creating bass lines. Now, with melodies, you know, if you're going to be playing like a solo, really what you're doing is creating a melody on the fly, although there is an element of this where it becomes more of a kind of conversation. It's more like speech in a way, rather than just making up a melody, because yeah, I mean, a lot of melodies are quite well, they're not static, but they don't move around as much as your average improvised solo. But we don't sit there playing, you know, I mean, there's the Jacko example of playing Alfie. You know, you don't play melodies that often on bass, you know, generally. But sax players do, pianists do, guitarists do, trumpet players do, even bassoon players do. All these different instruments, they do play melodies. So they get used to phrasing things, and they get used to playing things that aren't necessarily going to be like metronomically on the grid. So instead of it being bump, 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 you know, if you're playing a line, you might not want to be just on the grid. You know, you're going to be moving around. You're going to be thinking more dynamically. You're thinking more in terms of dynamics, playing with time, all of that stuff to make things more like vocals, more like singing. You're going to have more melodic phrasing, really. And so a lot of these instruments, they do that, but we don't on bass. We're always playing on the grid, you know, just playing, you know, a groove, let's say. So it's instantly a lot harder for bass players to start doing this. And all of a sudden somebody says, oh, take a solo. And then you've got to start thinking of melodically, you know, and you might not have any licks, let's say. So you just, you know, you let's say it's in E, and somebody says, oh, play something, and it's in E minor, and the the band's playing and you've got to take some kind of solo and you're thinking, okay, well, I know the E's in there. I mean, that's literally what a lot of people will do. They just start going. And they'll probably know a minor pentatonic scale, so you probably, you might put in a scale. Playing around with those kind of notes, just thinking, scale, I need a scale, so I've got a bunch of notes to play. So like, okay, I've got an E minor pentatonic. I can do something with that. Pretty much playing like you would on a fill, So there is that, but that's kind of like a bit of a hack, really, when you're actually wanting to get into actual more melodic soloing. So some of you may have seen the videos that I put out years ago, probably about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe now, talking about the basics of solo improvisation, and I'm going to actually talk a little bit about that stuff here today. So, what do we need? Well, really, in a solo, or let's say not even solos, just improvisation, just making stuff up, right? You're going to be working around a chord, right? There's going to be it a chord progression or a static chord or whatever. There's going to be some harmony in there. Even if there's no instruments there, there's going to be some implied harmony. There's going to be something that you're working around. You're going to be thinking, oh, am I going to be working around an E minor 7 or an E7 or something like? There's going to be some kind of harmonic kind of background, right? So the first thing you should think about is actually not scales at all. You really want to think about what the notes of the chord are. And really, you've got to kind of get used to what all of those chord tones sound like. Because if you know what they sound like, well, that's a good start. Like I was saying about actually putting in these, knowing that the flat 7 to the root sounds like that. You just get to know what they sound like. And that's why I say it's pretty much ear training, because you're actually learning what things sound like. When you know what they sound like, then you can draw upon them. If you don't know what they sound like, if you don't know what the thing that you're about to play sounds like, then it's just going to be random. It's going to be pot luck whether what you play is right. All right, you could say, oh, I know a scale. I know the scale works, so you know that you can play down through the scale. But if you don't know that you play on that minor pentatonic, if you don't know that is exactly what that sounds like, then again, you're pretty much playing randomly. You need to be able to speak through the instrument and know as I play that I know that those notes are coming out. I know that that's what it's going to sound like. So it's not a surprise. You don't want what you're playing to be a surprise. You're supposed to be talking through it. If you were having a conversation with someone and you just hoped for the best and hoped that some sounds that came out of your mouth made sense, then, it's not going to make for a very good conversation. So one of the things that you can do is work on the individual chord tones so that you know what they sound like in isolation and then in combination, because the chord tones are going to be the notes that work. They're the ones that blend with the chord in the background. So if there is a chord playing in the background, you know that they are the consonant notes. And this is where you have to start learning about consonance and dissonance. Consonant notes being ones that play nice. So here's consonants. So there's a G, an open G. Here's a G on the 5th fret. If I play them together, they play nice, right? Now, if I was to move that finger up to the A flat there, that's dissonance, right? That's heavy dissonance, right? And we know that that's got tension. Okay, so that's relaxed. And then when I play it back down to the G, it resolves. Okay, so consonance, dissonance, resolving back. Okay, that is pretty much music described. Okay, so you've got varying degrees of dissonance and resolution. Okay, I mean that's a bit of a technical way of putting it, but that is in essence what's going on with music. It's just that when you hear a key, perfect example. If I'm playing up through a C major scale. what does that want to do? It wants to resolve there. Okay, so there's always going to be that at play. Now, another thing to bear in mind, this is just the sort of basics of melodic creation, right? The other thing to bear in mind is, what do you get with a melody, with a melodic phrase? And remember that, a melody, when you're creating a melody, it's going to be made up of phrases, just in the way that I'm speaking is made up of phrases. So as I speak, I make a point, and then there's a cadence at the end where it stops. Then for another point, I'm going to be talking like this, and then blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah, and then I'm probably going to stop. And you can even hear melodically and rhythmically that there is a cadence point. So as I'm talking like this, I'm carrying on, and blah-de-blah-de-blah, and then you hear it stop, right? You heard it rhythmically cadence, and you heard it melodically cadence. So, or come to an end. It resolves. Okay, so there you go. I've got another resolution. There it stops. So you've got phrases. Now, what do you have in a melodic phrase? You've got three things. You've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay, so you've got a starting point, then you've got some stuff in the middle, and then you've got an end point, right? An end note. So a beginning, a starting point, a starting note, a load of stuff in the middle, and then an end note. So if I was to play, again, that major 7 arpeggio that I just played. Well, I had a start point. I started on the B. So this is a C major 7. So a B, C, E, G, B, right? So I started on the B. I had some notes. And then I ended on the B. That's a phrase. If I was to come up on let's say a D minor. There I started on the C, I came up, and then I landed on the C. Don't even worry about the notes in between. It's a starting point. There's that note. I started on the B, and then I finished on the B. And there was some stuff in the middle. And the cadence point that you have at the end, whether you hold it or whether you stop, actually has quite a lot of impact. So if I was to come up... Now, let me go back to that B. If I'd not played up through that major 7, and I'd played something like this, or hear how it always finishes on that note, and it always has that as its main cadence point and a lot of the character of the phrase. What I want to do, I could play. Whatever you play, that's one of the characteristic notes in there, is that final note. And where you start, obviously, is going to make a difference, in terms of the actual phrase itself, where you're going to be going. And then another thing to think about is, do you go up or down? When you start a phrase, you think, okay, am I going to go down? Or... whatever you play, you're going to be either going up or down. I mean, there are, contours to these things. You're going to move up and down and all around. But, no matter what point you're at, there's going to be a case of, am I going up or am I going down? Even on the most crazy kind of guitar solos. If you listen to someone like Guthrie Govan, right, or Paul Gilbert or whoever, right, and they're shredding away, you might hear this kind of... and there's an overriding contour of going up, right? And then there might be bits where it goes down. But it's all contours. It's going up or down. So these are kind of the nuts and bolts things that you get in a musical phrase. Does it go up? Does it go down? At any point, wherever you are. If I'm coming up... that's that C major 7 again, but... So it's the same. So I'm coming up, the overriding contour... And that one came down, but it was coming down, going back up and going down. But at every point, I'm thinking, okay, down a bit, up a bit... Now, obviously, you're not going to be thinking too much about that while you're playing. The idea is that eventually it becomes second nature. But this is still stuff to think about in terms of actual what makes up a melodic phrase. So you've got dynamics, you've got the actual tone itself, you've got the direction. You've got the starting point, the middle point, and the end point. So you've got all of these little things. And at the end of the day, the chord in the background, that harmonic background I talked about, all of the notes that you've got in there are going to be relative to whatever that chord is. And that's what I'm going to get at today with this track. So, you know, I'm working around this, that C major 7 there. So what I've got here is a little bit of just a basic pad chord, right? So that's a C major 7. Let me rewind it a bit so that I don't run out of time. So that's a C major 7. Okay, so it's got that nice, it's got that bittersweet 7th up on the top. It's a C major triad with a major 7th up on the top. And, so if I was to just play the arpeggio, notice how all those notes, no matter where I play them, all of those notes that I'm playing are a part of that chord, and that's why they work. Now here is why you don't just want to focus on scales, because if I said to you that's a C major 7 chord, oh, you can play a C major scale over it, which you can, right? Okay, so those notes do work, but listen to what happens if I land on an F. If I just hold on that F, it wants to resolve back to that E. The reason it wants to do that is because that's a non-chord tone. Yes, it's in the scale, but it's a non-chord tone. Now, let's try an A. Now that's okay, that's got less dissonance than the F. That was because that's really close to the E. But there's an A, that's the 6th of the chord. It actually wants to resolve back to that 5th. Or it could actually resolve back to the 7th. Let's try D, the 2nd, okay, 2nd degree. So C major scale, the 2nd degree is D, right? That's actually got quite a nice sound. A lot of people like to use those ninths, okay, so that's a 2nd or a 9th, right? But really, it actually does want to still resolve. It is still a dissonance, it's just not a heavy dissonance. It's actually a really nice dissonance. So D, 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 C, C. Okay, so you can hear the dissonance and consonance at play, and that's why you don't want to just blast around on scales, because if you're not careful, you start, and then you end up landing on that F, when in fact you really want to land on that E. Or something else. I mean, you might want to land on that. That's the point. You know, if you actually know what that sounds like, you might want to do that and then move and then actually resolve it. But here's another thing, right? So those chord tones and non-chord tones, you can use the non-chord tones. You can use that F. You can use that 4th, but you can use them in passing. So as an example, if I was to use them as passing notes, so a passing note goes between 2 chord tones. So just so that you know what's going on here. So the actual arpeggio that I'm using is C, E, G, and B. So I'm playing it up here just so you can hear it a bit better, because down here it's a bit more muddy, but up here you can really hear the melody, right? So I'm playing 15th fret of the A string, 14th and 17th fret of the D string, and then the 16th fret of the G string. C, E, G, B. You can also play the B there at the 14th fret of the A string, and then down to the G at the 15th fret of the E string as well, and then the E at the 12th fret of the E string if you just want to extend it a little bit. And there's the C up the top at the 15th fret of the G string, and if you really want to carry on going up, you could put in, there's the E and the G up at the top, so that's going to be the, what's that, the 19, 20, 20, 20, is that the 21st fret, 21st fret, 21, 22, 23, 25, I don't know the numbers when you get up to the top, I just know them as notes, so that's the 21st fret and the 24th fret as well. So, where was I with that? So we know that those notes work. Now, if we want to put something in passing, if I want to use that 4th, what I can actually do is move between the 3rd and the 5th. So there's the 3rd, there's the 5th, E and G. Okay, so that's 14th fret D string, and then the 17th fret on the G string. So we've got those 2 chord tones, and I'm actually going to expand on that a little bit in a minute. I could move up from the E to the G using that F. Let's put a bit of reverb to make it even nicer. Okay, so that's E, F, and G. I'm using the F, that horrible note, but so I can go between the two chord tones, so you can connect them with the scale notes. If I wanted to play the C to the E, I can use the D as a passing note, and then use the A to pass between the G and the B. So all of a sudden we've got some notes that we can use. We've got the chord tones, not that one, and then we can actually start incorporating the scale. Okay, so these are just some melodic devices you can use. You could also use neighbour notes, so you could actually play a chord tone and actually go above or below with the next scale tone. So on the C, so that's the root of the chord, up to the D, down to the B and back, E, up to the F and back, E to the D and back, G, up to the A and back, and then okay, so let me just rewind that back. So that was how I brought scales in. Now, that's kind of jumping the gun a little bit, because what I'm actually going to show you here is how to get used to the sounds of these chord tones. Because, yes, that's the kind of nuts and bolts of how you can make phrases out of scales and out of chord tones. But really, you need to know a little bit more about what they sound like. It's all well and good to just be able to play through these things randomly, but you want to learn the sound. So now let's try that. So I'm going to play that chord again. Now I'm going to raise the bass tone a little bit here. Raise the bass sound, sorry. Right, okay. So think about what the chord tones are. We've got the root, we've got the major third, the perfect fifth, and that major seventh. So root, so 1, 3, 5, and 7, right? So we've got the C. The C is the root note. Okay, so there's your arpeggio, there's the root. So what you can do is just play around rhythmically on that root note just to get used to the sound of it. And what you'll find is that that root note has a lot of like home to it, a lot of rest, a lot of resolution, because it is the tonic, it's the root note. So nothing works better than that root note in terms of the resolution, you know, and the consonants. So we've just got that swirly pad. Now I know that this isn't playing through Donna Lee, but you get the idea. So we're just hearing in isolation what that chord tone sounds like. You know, just thinking kind of rhythmically, just coming up with something. You can hear there, hear how it sounds with the chord. Okay, now if I split down here, or just the note. Now that won't mean that much because it's just the root note, okay? But now let's bring some of the notes in. Let's bring the fifth into play. Now the fifth has a little bit more flavour to it, so we're going to bring the G into play. Here it's got a lot of consonants. You can hold it just to really milk the sound, and then a bit of rhythm. Okay, again, you can hear how it's a consonant note. It really blends well. now let's try using them both. So on the C, let's try the G. So you can have almost a question and answer with that. So maybe up to the C up here. And you can just play around on those, getting used to what they sound like, you know, the resolution, how it sounds when you move from that G, which has a little bit more dissonance, to then the C when it comes to rest. So listen to how when I play the C, it comes to rest. So I'm on the G. Okay, so you hear it coming to rest. Okay, let's add the E. So this is going to be the third of the chord, okay? Okay, so this is where the real flavor of the chord comes in, because this is where the major quality comes from. So instead of it just being the root note and the fifth, which don't really have that much quality to them, now we're getting into the actual quality notes. The third and the seventh, the real color tones for the chord. So again, let's bring it back a little bit. So let's listen to that E. It fits perfectly. I mean, it's not out at all. It's got a little bit more flavor. Notice how you can vary the actual lengths. So this is the E. I'm playing at the 14th fret of the D string. And back to the C. Okay, so resolution. Back to the E. Home. Now let's try the G again. E. So we're going between the fifth and the third there. On the third. Fifth. Down to the C again. Third, color tone. Okay? So, oops, come back. So, we're just adding them one at a time and just getting used to what they sound like. And like I said, you can play them all over the place. You know, I've got the G up there, you've got the E there, C, G. You know, we're just using the notes of the triad. You know, and once you've done that, you can start to combine them. Okay, so again, just pick two of them. So maybe the E and the G. And just working around them. And just improvising around them. Now, I know that this is not soloing, and I know that it's not Charlie Parker, and it's not, you know, there's nothing to this. This is just an exercise, just getting used to actually getting those chord tones into your head, the sound of them, what they sound like with the chord. But this is all going to be a really good foundation, because as you start to do more with your phrases and you start to add notes into the mix, you've got this foundation of knowing what the chord tones sound like and how all of those notes around it, whether they're scale notes, whether it's modal, whether you've got chromatic notes in there, whatever, sequences, as you're working through arpeggio sequences, inversions, whatever it is, you have this kind of foundation of knowledge of the actual sound of the chord tones over the chord, right? And like I said, this applies equally to bass lines. So if you're playing that, there's the root and fifth. That's the kind of thing that we as bass players kind of know. Or we kind of get used to them in this low position, just going between root and fifth or whatever. So yeah, now let's bring the other real big color note into there, and that's going to be the seventh. So over this, so it's going to be the B. So listen to how this sounds. So this is the one that's really going to have the color. And this is why people say avoid the root and start using the color tones, because that instantly gives you a little bit more of the feel of the chord and a little bit more expression. So I'm gonna isolate some chord tones here. I'm gonna into groups of two. So I've got the B. Let's use the G along with it. There's the G and now the B. You can hear it. You can hear that bittersweet sound on the top. And if I was to start using them in, let's just go down them in order. So. Third and the seventh. I came up the full arpeggio then, and then maybe the C up on the top. So in isolating them in groups of two, so instead of someone just saying, oh, use the arpeggio, instead of just running an arpeggio, you're actually getting to hear what the individual chord tones sound like. So this is a core part of all of this. It's just learning, it's just getting your ear used to what these actual chord tones are, and then hearing them in combination. Like I said, you can use sequences for these things. So that, let's say we use groups of three. So I've got an E, a G, and a B, a G, a B, and a C. Now remember what I said about the ending notes. Whatever I do, if you land on that seventh, you get that sound of the chord, you get that bittersweet sound. If I land on the G, I mean, I'm not expecting you to suddenly start whipping out loads of arpeggios, but you can hear that whatever I land on at the end, it has a lot of character of the phrase. Ending on the third. Now ended on the root. Here, when you land on the root, it kind of lands on home. There's so much resolution to it that often you don't want to use that. You want to stay away from it, because if you land on that, it's got a lot of finality to it, as opposed to, can you hear how that's got a lot more, I'd say emotion. It's not emotion, it's just more expressive. Or, see what I mean about the root? You finish on the root note, that C, and it's just like dead end. So So that's a really good little exercise by taking a pad chord like that and then just experimenting with the actual notes of the arpeggio. Start with individual ones, start putting them together and just getting used to what they sound like. You know, by the time we finished with that, as I just worked through them, you could hear that's as soon as we brought that into play, it's like, oh man, now we've got a sound, okay? So once you've started working on the chord tones, because I mean we're quite limited there, that's just, you know, 4 notes with that chord, with that C major 7, you can actually start bringing in some more of those scale notes. Just a same exercise, just playing over a simple chord like that, and you don't have to start venturing out into different positions. Just stay in one area, play rhythmically, think more rhythmically and dynamically. That way you're going to start you're going to learn how to mess around with phrases a little better. If you're just playing, you know, just playing these regimented exercises, it's just not going to work as well. You actually want to play rhythmically around on individual chord tones. So now let's try adding some of the scale notes. So remember what I said about the C major 7. If we were to use a C major scale over it, you could use a Lydian as well. There's a bunch of different scales that you can use for any one chord. But over a C major 7, if we were going to use the C major scale, the scale itself sounds like this. Okay, so those notes work. But like I said, if we were to land on the F, it wants to resolve. So now let's do the same thing that we did before, playing around with the chord tones, but this time I'm going to start using some of the surrounding scale notes. So if I'm on the C, remember that's a boring one, it's just so final. But if we actually add the D, the next note up, okay, so this is the second of the C major scale, you instantly get something a little bit more interesting. So that's a neighbour note function. So we're just moving to the next non-chord tone up and coming back. Or the next scale note up and then back. Or down. Instantly we've got something a bit more interesting than or. So we've now got the actual chord tones. We can actually move between those. Now it's just the absolute basics of creating a melody. Now let's try it with the G, the 5th. So this is going to be that 17th fret of the D string, and I'm going to play the A above or the F below. So remember what I said, the F on its own, but just in passing. Now the E, so on its own, there's the F, I can bring it in, and then the D. So play them in sequence like that. Okay, so you can play the B as well, so we've got that 7th, and then you're up to the C and back, neighbour note. And if you play with a little bit of dynamics and a little bit of phrasing, a little bit rhythmic, you know, play around with the rhythm, you're just taking 2 notes and then just making something that sounds a little bit nicer. Okay, and then so if I mean, there you've got a melody, you've got a starting note, and then you've got a phrase, and then an end. So I mean, that in itself, that's a nice little phrase. But the beauty of this is that when you incorporate the scale notes, the actual non-chord tones, around the chord tone framework, because remember we're using the chord tones in here, we actually start to make a more flowing melody. So I mean, that in itself, and then all of a sudden you can start to branch out a little bit more, like I did there. You can start to bring in these longer kind of scale lines, but remember, I'm still coming back to the chord tone. By building up from the chord tones as your basis, you know, they're the consonant notes. You start with those, and then I can start to branch out into the scalar notes, into the scalar. Okay, so I'm just making use of the C major scale then, and just there you go, there's that fifth, third, fifth that I was using before. And you can tell that as I'm starting to put more and more of these in, I mean, sometimes that F doesn't really sound that nice. That's why you're more likely to use Lydian on a lot of these things when it's like this. But still, you can then start to, well, hold on, before we start moving any further, that was just neighbour notes, and then I started putting in a little bit of a turn on there with the scale. By using the two, there's a neighbour note above, neighbour note below. This is just on the C. But by using them both, we've got this nice little turn. So this is where actually learning classical pieces comes in handy, because a lot of these little devices are in there. You've got turns, and when you analyze them, you start seeing them as passing notes, chromatic passing notes, acciaccuras, all this kind of thing. So there, that was neighbour notes, but then we can use passing notes. A passing note is where you move between two chord tones. So the neighbour note was just to one and back. So here I'm on home, I move outside and I come back inside. It was raining. So we're on the doorstep there of the house. You go out to the car. Oh, heck, it's raining. Let's go back. Oh. So that's neighbour notes. So to pass between them, let's say we take the E and the G, okay? So we've got 14th fret and 17th fret on the D string, the chord tones there. We've got the F in between, so we can fill in the gap. It's just like dot to dot. Okay? Okay, so let's listen to what that sounds like. Let's just bring it back a whoop. C major 7 again. Bring it back a bit. So E, F, G. That's a passing note between them. That F is like awful sounding, but when it's with the E and the G, and then by using the neighbour note above the G, so E passing up to the G, back down to the E. So I know that I'm kind of things are getting a little bit like, oh, passing note, neighbour note, and it's moving around. You don't have to be too clinical about it. It's just that what you've got is this basic, this framework of the chord tones, and then you're moving around them, and the scale notes, those extra non-chord tones, fill in the gaps basically. So I came up from the third to the fifth, back down, then a little neighbour note. You don't have to be thinking neighbour note, passing note, you know, chord tone when you're actually improvising. The idea is that you just get used to what the chord tones sound like. You get used to what the sound of a neighbour note is, get used to what a passing note is, and a chromatic passing note. Because that's the next thing. You can start putting in chromatics. Put in what you want, really. You can put in whatever notes you want as long as you resolve it. So, and then you pass a note between the C and the E. Let's try that. So that was C, D, E. That's all it is. Two chord tones. There I'm playing 17th and 21st fret on the G string. But fill it in the gap. There I'm going up and back down. Okay, so you've just got this passing up between the third and the root, and then you could use the A there, the sixth, to pass between the seventh and the fifth. Or lot of the sort of more expressive notes in there are going to be the third and the seventh. So you kind of play around with those. So like I said, get used to what the chord tones sound like. Milk them for all they're worth on a backing track like this. I'll give you some details about this later on. But you get used to what they sound like, really get to know what a seventh sounds like over the chord, what a third sounds like over the chord. And bear in mind, this is just a major 7 chord, so you've got to get used to this with other chords as well, like minor 7s, dominant 7s, etc. But you get used to what the sound is, and then you start to branch out so that you're not actually just playing chord tones, you're actually starting to use non-chord tones, right? So you can do other things like enclosures, so you could play both notes around the chord tone. So if I take C there at the 17th fret of the G string and actually play the D and then the B and then the C, that's an enclosure. Or I could play them both. And like I said, if you try and play more expressively so that you're not playing regimented rhythm and regimented dynamics, that's an enclosure. You can use chromatic enclosures as well. Okay. So this is what I mean when I talk about melodic devices. You've got these neighbor notes, passing notes, and it's just a really good way of getting used to chord tones, because usually what people say is, oh, there's the bunch of chord tones, there's an arpeggio, go forth and improvise. And it's like, you've not going to have any ideas. Now, improvisation is not just about this, obviously. Then you want to listen to actual other people improvising and learn vocabulary. You learn how other people do this. The thing I was talking about with how you start a phrase, you're going to have a starting note for the phrase, you're going to have a finishing note for the phrase, and you're going to have some notes in between. Every single phrase is going to be like that. So if I'm playing something like, so that's a really popular, famous Charlie Parker lick, right? So let's turn off the reverb. Okay, so if you were to play through, transcribe a solo like that, you get used to looking at the fact that that's over a C major, for instance. It's starting on the 5th. You know that, okay, that's the starting note, and it's coming up to the C, which is the root note. And then it's playing through the C major scale with a chromatic approach note into the E. So it's D, E flat, E. So, and then F, F sharp, G. So if I was to play that without the rhythm, and then back to the 3rd, it's been playing around the chord tones, and then a little turn on there, and then comes down that A minor and then down. Now, obviously, you don't need to learn that lick. That's just an example. When you start learning things, you hear a melody that you like, you hear a lick that you like, whatever it is, you can learn them, look at them, think, how does that relate to the chord tones? What degree does it start on? What does it finish on? What's it using? Is it using passing notes? Is it using chromatic notes? Is it using chromatic passing notes? Instead of just thinking, oh, it's just this pattern, or it's just, I don't know, is it using a bebop scale? Whatever instead of all that, just think chord tones. You've got that as your framework, and then you've got these other ones. You've just got these other things working around that framework. So that's your scaffolding, and then you've just got this other stuff tied to it. So that was let's just that was with the C major 7. Let's have a listen to what these things sound like over an A minor 7. So this is going to be an A minor 7 chord. So instantly we've got a different kind of feel. So this is going to be an A minor arpeggio. So we've got the A, C, E, and G up on the top, root, minor 3rd, 5th, and flat 7. So we've got that root note again. Let's milk it, see what it sounds like. We've got that sound of that. Listen to the minor 7. What does it sound like with that root? 5th, 3rd. There's that minor 3rd. That's just the chord tones. A to the G. So then obviously you take that A, and for this one I'm going to use an A Dorian, let's say. So don't worry about the fact it's a mode or anything like that, but I'm just going to use some neighbour notes first of all. Ooh, this G string keeps slipping off. I'm not used to this Ibanez at the moment, so. There's a passing note. On the 7th, let's use the passing note. So that's the neighbour note. 5th. Third. Passing notes. So as soon as you learn about these passing notes and kind of get an idea for what scale it's going to be, now I won't go too much further with this because it could go on forever, but you get the idea. We've got chord tones. So you have to learn what your arpeggios are. So that's the key to this. If you're going to learn what to play over a C major 7, you learn a C major 7 arpeggio. If you want to play over an A minor, you play an A minus 7. And then you just have to learn about what scale notes to use. A lot of the time, if it's going to be a static chord like that, it's going to be a Dorian. You can use this is where modes come into play. If you're just playing over a static chord like this, let's have a listen to the difference. So here's an A minor, a natural minor scale to begin with. We've got a minor 6th in there. And then if I was to use a Dorian, it's got a major 6th in it. Okay, and like I said, you can actually resolve onto the non-chord tones as long as they work okay. That's where a lot. You know how I said about the 7th and 3rd have got a lot of the flavour? Well, the actual non-chord tones have actually got even more flavour because of the dissonance. That note, that's a major 6 over the top. That's the Dorian sound. But it all stems from learning what the chord tones sound like. Because when you start teaching people chord tones online and on lessons and stuff, and you're saying, okay, well, you can use chord tones, because you can just use them for making up. You can just, use them to create riffs. But when you start trying to do this kind of thing, you really get to hear what the actual chord tones themselves sound like over the top. But when you tell people to just learn the arpeggios and use those, they start thinking arpeggio sequences. So it just ends up being, or whatever, And rather than it actually being individual chord tones, learning what the individual chord tones sound like, because you'll then hear that in all of the other phrases that you learn. But beyond that, obviously, you want to go and learn melodies. You want to learn bass lines a lot, but you also want to try learning melodies. Vocal melodies, guitar melodies, whatever. Just try learning simple melodies just to get to hear what they sound like. So if you're going to be learning like a jazz standard or something like that. You can learn. You can learn a melody for the actual jazz standard. So instead of just learning just the actual the bass line, or even just instead of learning chords and that, learn the melody, learn the actual vocal melody for it, and you'll get a little bit better at actually phrasing these kind of things. But like I said, these actual chord tones and the way that you move through the chord tones using passing notes and neighbor notes and that, it becomes really handy for actually learning how to create bass lines. Because if you're playing over something like a C major, You know, if you want to put in a little, that's a neighbour note. You know, that I played up there. That's a really, really popular move. And just getting to know what the difference is between the difference between the root and the fifth, the seventh. Just getting used to what that sounds like over it, or on the A minor 7 that I've got in there. That's flat 7. Then you can actually learn what the modal side of it sounds like with the mid. Because you know what the sounds of the chord tones are and what the sounds of the non-chord tones are. And obviously beyond that you can start using intervals, you know, so if you're playing over that A minor 7, instead of just using the chord tones in a very linear fashion, you can actually start to then use there I'm using a major 6th interval. You can start to mess around with those, but it's all just messing around, just getting used to it. There's no, you know, it's an underrated thing to just mess about, you know, just mess about over the top of it. Oh, that sounds nice. Oh, that doesn't sound nice. I don't like that. I like that. You know, just playing around with it. But it all stems from the chord tones. You learn what the chord tones sound like, and then everything else works around that framework. Add them in. And the reason I mentioned neighbour notes and passing notes is because it's a very systemized way of actually bringing other notes into play. You know, I know it sounds very academic, but it's a really easy way of bringing notes outside of the chord tones, okay? Rather than just thinking, you know, just playing scales, you know. Okay, so that's enough there. I mean, like I said, I wanted it to be for more people that are getting started on improvisation. So I didn't really want to get too far into the weeds with it, but hopefully that'll give you something to mess around with. What I'm going to do is try and put those these things, those chords. I'm going to try and put those backing tracks somewhere on the site, because you actually get those with the Scale Essentials course. So the Scale Essentials course obviously works on a lot of this stuff, as does the Chord Tone Essentials course. But those tracks in particular are a part of the Scale Essentials course. I mean, I can actually put a few of them up on the actual website so you can try playing over them. I mean, you can just, you know, sequence one up or whatever, but I'll try and put some of those up just so that you've got something to work around. Maybe on a C, so that you can just play around with them on a C or an A or something like that. Yeah, that's that. So let's see what everybody's got to say. Hopefully that made some sense. Like I said, the main thing that I'm aiming to instill in you is the actual chord tone framework, knowing that this is what chord tones sound like. Build from the chord tone foundation, learn what they sound like, and then the other stuff comes in, which is why chord tones always trump scales in terms of the actual, you know, the usefulness. You really want to go for the chord tones first, then learn scales and apply those into that chord tone framework. And beyond that, like I said, you want to start transcribe. If you really want to learn how to improvise, start transcribing solos or learning solos. You know, it doesn't have to be Charlie Parker. It can be anybody. You know, just something that you like. Hopefully, something fairly straightforward. Okay, so let's see what people have got to say. Even man noodling around just sounds great. I don't know. It's not that great, is it? Just played some notes, but thanks anyway. C. Lydian is always tasty. Yeah, if you want to, you can. Let me just, as an example, someone just mentioned C. Lydian. So if I was to play the C major 7 again. You know how I mentioned the actual C major scale? Well, you can actually use the C. Lydian over that as well. This is all going to be based on context. Don't just start sticking C. Lydian and everything. But so when it comes to the actual non-chord tones in there, you've got your chord tones. put that F sharp in there. That's the Simpsons. I just met a girl named Maria. So you've got West Side Story in there as well. You've got all kinds of stuff. If you like Cardiacs, then Cardiacs use Lydian as well. Lydian's great for stuff. That sharp 4 really gives you a lot of flavour. And if you're going to be playing Lydian, you really want to milk that note. So that's just an aside. Thanks for that, Jared. I think I remember seeing a video of yours in 2014 on 3-finger plucking. That's the one. Yeah, when I was doing... what did I do? I did... what was it? I did Disposable Heroes, didn't I? And I think I did... Elephant Gun, yeah. My 3-finger picking's not as quick as it used to be. I need to work on it. You can put the rhythm to like real phrases like "How are you today?" Yeah, I mean, if you really want to hear some of that done well, you want to listen to Frank Zappa, Steve Vai's stuff that he did with Zappa, where he'd take speech, kind of sprakstimmer or whatever you call it, and so you take the speech and you actually put an actual you orchestrate basically. You can actually so I think it was. So it did there's one called The Dangerous Kitchen and one called Jazz Discharge Party Hats, and yeah, Steve Vai transcribed it with all the crazy rhythms that you get from speech and then actually read it and played it onto the thing, and then he would actually take tune percussion and actually turn some of these things into orchestral pieces, based on that. Messiaen used to transcribe Birdsong, and you'll hear a lot of it if you listen to his quartet for the End of Time, which is something that I'm actually transcribing for bass at the moment. But the in there's a lot of his birdsong transcriptions. Take anything that's got melody and rhythm and play it on a bit on an instrument. I could talk about that forever. I was going to write a book on that, and how the rhythm of it. I kind of had this... I don't know. I need to do a little bit more research into this. If I ever do a PhD, I'm going to do it on this. I'll tell the story about it. So, for a start, if I was to talk like this, you can hear that all speech has rhythm. And I love listening to speech in terms of its actual musical content, because speech has a definite pulse and rhythm and melody. Depending on who's talking, it might be, it can be more or less interesting. But if I'm speaking, you can get a kind of idea of what the tempo is by just clicking the fingers like this. So you can hear that there's a lot of kind of odd rhythms going along. If you listen to those things that I'm saying and actually think, if that was like if I was melodically playing that with an instrument over the top, and, when I come to the end of a phrase, you'll hear that it probably is going to land on one of the clicks. Okay, so you've got that. You can tell where the timing is of it. And listen to the cadences at the end. They always come roughly on the beat. So you've got this thing going on. And I've got a feeling that is roughly going to be influenced by pulse rate. And I think it's one of the reasons why sometimes, when you're talking to someone on a phone or you're having a conversation and the conversation's just either you're getting bored by the other person talking because they're too slow, or they start stressing you out because it's too quick, which is generally what happens when people are talking to me. I think it's because of a mismatch between people's pulse rates. I've got nothing... I can't prove this right now, but I really want to investigate this and see whether that pulse that influences the speech is based on our actual pulse itself or our blood pressure, something like that. Because I can tell just by... I can just start doing that, and I know... You can hear when I finish the phrase, bang, it comes down on it. I'm not talking to the click. I'd be talking like this anyway, but then when I start putting the click in, you can hear that it's probably going to finish on that. So I think that a lot of it is based on on our pulse rate. And the reason that I think, I think this gets into industry and everything, because I remember working, some of you from the History of Talking Bass blog that I put up will remember me talking about how I worked for a software company for a while. So I was working for a place called Wellcom. It's not around, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was up in Harrogate. After I finished my degree at Leeds College, I couldn't be bothered with music anymore. I'd had my fill of it. I'd done it for 5 years, just like constant, just like bang, 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 and I finished. And I was going to do one or two things. I was either going to join the RAF, the Royal Air Force, as an intelligence officer, because that's one of the things you can do when you get a degree. You can join the military as an officer. So I was interested in doing that. So, I would have gone into software because, you know, of my computing background. So I ended up getting this job at this place called Wellcom. And in that office, it was just horrendous. It just had this bad... You know, when shops and offices have got a bad karma, they have a bad vibe, and people start having days off sick and all that just because it's, you know, because of how they are. Well, it was one of those places. You just could not bear to be in there, and I couldn't figure out why. I was like, man, what is it about this place? Just everybody was down. And then one day, I was sat there and I was kind of clicking my fingers, and I suddenly realized that my speech and that pulse, because I was already into that pulse thing that I was talking about. So this was 1998. I was thinking of that, and then I suddenly realized that my clicking was in time with the fans in the room and all the computers. All the computers in there were like probably about 50 of them, were all in sync, because they all had they were all exactly the same computers with the same fan systems, and they all turned on at the same time on the power. So they'd switch the power on, and ruff, 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 ruff. You couldn't normally hear it that much, but I noticed that my clicking and my speech patterns were being influenced by that rhythm of the fan whirring. You could hear it, the cyclic rhythm. And I thought, man, I think it was a little bit quicker than I would have normally spoken. And I started thinking, man, I think that is upping everybody's blood pressure. Because, you know, if you're talking to somebody in a conversation, and whoever is generally the more dominant in terms of the actual tempo, you know, I said about this with the speech when you're talking, if somebody's got a more dominant tempo, it tends to influence everybody else. That's why if you're in an argument with somebody, it pays to actually try and bring down the tempo. So you start just being a little bit more relaxed and you talk more like this. So I'm not talking with that fast tempo that I had before when I was talking like this. So now I'm talking with this kind of click. But if I was to slow it down a little bit, you can hear that it just gradually brings down the feel of the conversation. And as I talk a little bit less, with a little bit of a less tempo, this is kind of how you talk if you were going to be doing a hypnosis session, and then you just bring it down a little bit more, just a slight bit more with the actual talking. That, in terms of the actual speed of the tempo, I think it influences your blood pressure. And I think in that office that those fans were influencing everybody's blood pressure, and it was getting everything up. I've got no proof of this, but just, you know, logically thinking about it, I think I could write a book on it. I think I could do a PhD on it. So I don't know. See what you guys think. But I digress. Chef Sean, I feel like this was the lesson I needed to see. Woohoo! I was getting overwhelmed by all the other advice. That's good. I'm glad somebody's got something out of it. Thanks, Aditya. Need to incorporate the seventh more into my lines. That sounds so smooth. Yeah, but make sure that there's a seventh in the chord. I mean, you can use them over just basic triads, yeah. But you have to be careful, because if you use a major seventh, then it's actually a dominant seven, and you got to make sure you get your chord tones right. But in making a melody, then yeah, it is a really important one to use. What are you using to produce the pad sound? A computer app? I just did it in Cubase. I just knocked out a pad. just basic chord pad, and then just let it, and then just dragged it so that it was like for like however long, 7 minutes I think I had it running for, and then exported. That was it. Please raise the volume of your voice. Hardly audible. Hardly audible. Really? Wouldn't the F sharp of the Lydian also be a problem like the F, since it's a half step below the G and thus creates instability tension? Not so much, because the third has more flavour. Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, if you hold... But the fourth, just the way that the actual... how it works with that fourth, because of the suspension of it. So the suspension of that to the third. The actual F sharp works more as a chromatic sort of neighbour leading into the G. The F, it really suspends the quality of the chord, which is why if you're over a minor chord, you can put that fourth in fine. It'll work a lot better. It's not all to do with the fact it's a semitone out. It's more to do with the actual with that F, that it's actually a suspension of the quality of the chord. The quality of that chord is a major. It's been suspended when you put the F in there. The G, it is a dissonance. It sounds like a dissonance, but it's why you can actually put in some of those other dissonances around, like the A flat. It's still going to want to lead in. Still going to want to actually lead into the... Oh, and also, one of the other things is that when you actually treat these things as compound intervals, so they're not in a low register, you can generally get away with them a little bit easier. For instance, if you were playing the chord and then you actually put that right in the chord, it's going to sound more dissonant than if you put it an octave higher. But you are right, it actually does have a similar kind of tension. It wants to resolve back to the... I mean, if I just play it, C major 7. Hear it? So, let me play it up the octave. So, here we are on C. So, here's the F sharp. It does have that tension, but it's a more pleasing tension in a way. And then that F, it just... Remember, all of the different notes in the key, you know, in that major scale, are going to have their own flavour in terms of the actual dissonances, because of the actual ratios between the actual vibrations in there. You know, the actual hertz of the waveform. I'm still a little confused, since the E, F is a half step. The F sharp to G is also a half step. Wouldn't it also be dissonant? Yes, like I said, it is also dissonant. Is melody same or similar as voicing? I don't know what you mean by that. They are two different things. Voicing is how you voice a chord. Voicing is more like voice... if you think of a choir, if you think of how you would distribute notes of a chord between a choir, you'd have the soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Soprano voicing, well, the voicing of the chord is how you distribute them. Soprano voice, alto voice, tenor voice, bass voice, for instance. And then how you distribute them amongst them is, or between them, is voicing. But within them, you know, on an instrument, no, I don't necessarily always mean with a voice. You know, it's how on a piano it'd be the same, or in a brass section, or on a bass. Lather is a good Zappa album. Yeah. That was he kind of released that on a. He was going to release it in the 70s, wasn't he? And then he played it on a radio. I had it a long time ago, back in the early 90s. Somebody had given it me on because I think there was a bootleg going around of it, because he released it on a radio station. But I mean, a lot of the songs on Lather were on other albums as well. But it is a good album. I started the chord tones course on this improvisation hang is very helpful. Thank you. Oh yeah, also Jefferson Airplane video had that triple plucking. Yeah, but that was a newer one. The one in 2014 was the fast one. Somewhere I've got a book on how to learn music, and it actually recommends playing over drones. Yeah, well, I mean, you could class this as a drone, but it's with an actual chord. There are drones there on the Scale Essentials as well. Rhythm training to Christopher Walken sounds like a good idea. Yeah, or Shatner. Shatner would be the best one. One day I was going to, well, I'm such a William Shatner fan, but I was going to transcribe some of William Shatner's dialogue. I mean, it must be great. There'll be some 11 tuplets in there for sure. That pulse rate makes an awful lot of sense. Yeah, see what you think. I want to follow through on that. I just never get round to it. But I need to do a bit of research into it and then start, measuring people's actual pulse rates and then seeing. I need to measure my own and see whether what I measure as the click is exactly the same, and then do it with other people to prove that first of all, that whether it's influenced by pulse or blood pressure, and then see whether, and then do some experiments seeing if I can actually influence the way that people talk, the rhythm and the tempo mainly. It's all about tempo, not the actual rhythms. If I can influence the tempo by using external sources like fans and whatever, lighting, vibration in lighting, there'll be all kinds of rhythmic pulses that you can influence. I'm sure the CIA have looked into this quite extensively. Reminds me of something David Byrne would write, yeah. Yeah, that pulse idea comes into play with band members too. Yeah, I mean, or any kind of gathering, It's amazing how much of an influence it could play on life in general. Marcus just purchased your ear training for bass volume 1. Looking forward to hear better what I play. Maybe improvising better. Yep, cool. Two drummers in the Grateful Dead used to feel each other's pulse for a bit prior to the start of a show in order to get in sync with one another. Well, maybe they were onto it as well. I'm sure this has probably been studied. It's very hard to actually come up with something that hasn't been studied. I'd be amazed if nobody's actually done a full 500-page thesis on it. But it could have implication for industry. That's what I'm thinking. And this is where I'm going to make my million. Would you discuss 4 key chord tones, minor, major, dom, and minor 7 flat 5 for exploring jazz charts? I got here late. You may have discussed it. I kind of discussed it to some extent, but you just apply the same thing that I did there to each of those 4 chord types. But I talked about all of those in the chord tone live hang that I did last week. If you go back through my live hangs on the channel, you'll see one where I talked about chord tones. Check that out. I talked about that at length. And how major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, and minor 7 flat 5, how they're not the be-all and end-all of chords, even though that is the way that people tend to teach it. They go, okay, the 4 7th chords, major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, and minor major 7. It's like minor 7 flat 5, I mean. And it's like, there are a few more than that, and I don't know, I have a bit of a beef with how people are a little bit scatty with that. I think it's just because I learned music theory before I did. I learned classical music theory a long time before I ever did all the jazzy stuff. And so I had a really good little grounding in the basics, in intervals and chord construction. And then I found that in a lot of jazz lessons, let's say, that people miss out a lot of the basics, especially intervals, but they miss out a lot to do with chord construction. So much to do with chord construction. And I mean the basics. I don't mean, altered extensions and stuff. I mean the absolute basics of the 4 triads and then the 8 7th chords and then the, the fact that there's extensions and altered extensions, just basically tertian harmony. Because I think when you actually, like every time I've done a live hang and I've talked about that stuff, or done a lesson where I've talked about tertian harmony and introduced the multiple 7th chords that you can create using stacked thirds, all of a sudden people have these light bulb moments. And I'm like, man, this is such basic stuff that everybody should just be discussing. Or if you start talking about intervals. And it's amazing how many people don't start with intervals. You should learn your intervals before you learn your chord tones and before you learn your scales, for sure. I mean, apart from your major scale. Major scale's different. I'm sure that there's a bunch of guys that would say, no, you're wrong. But I don't know. It's just that when you actually talk to people and then they have all these light bulb moments, you know that they're having the light bulb moments because they were missing those. They had holes in the knowledge, in the fundamentals. God, that spin class next door. There's a thing next door. They have like spin classes and stuff like that, and I can hear Sweet Child of Mine playing at about 400 mile an hour. You know, like when you do these exercise things, and everybody just they just quantize everything to the same tempo, so everything, even if it's a ballad, it ends up being like, boom, boom, boom. Okay, right, I better get moving. What do you play if there are slash chords in a chart? Well, the note after the slash, so really a slash chord is actually a chord, and then it's a chord like C, and then a slash is actually supposed to be below, and then you've got the note below. That note below is the bass note. So basically, it's an inversion. So, I mean, more often than not. So if you've got C major, C is in the bass. So I'm just going to play it as a chord, first of all. So there's C major. But if I was to play C over E, and then C over G, it's the same chord. It's a C major over an E in the bass, and that makes a big difference. So if I'm playing, let's say I do it here. So there's the C, the top two notes of the C major, right? And I'm putting an E in the bottom. And then, oops, it's hard to do it in a really high register. But what you get in there is one of the other chord tones in the bass. And, you can use them for passing. So, like, so there's the C major over E, leading into F, and then G. So you play, as a bass player, you play that note that's on the other side of the slash. You've got the chord, so if it was C/E, you play the E. But that doesn't mean that you have to only play the E. It's just that you're best off playing that on beat one. So if it was C, then C over E, you'd play the C, and then you'd play the E. But you can still use the chord tones of C for, if you're trying to make up a melodic bass line. But to cut a long story short, to avoid the fluff, if you see C over E, you play the E. That is the bass note. It's the lowest note in the chord. Sure you haven't got a devil worshipping cult next door? Could do. Could have. Yeah, I thought the G and R was me. Yeah, I'm sure you can all hear it now. It's right there, and you can hear everything. But yeah, which is one of the reasons why I'm going to get moving. But keep it moving. What was I about to say? That with the cult worshipping next door. Me and the missus, we used to live in a flat just down the road. And it was, we only stayed there a few months, but it was just because we got turfed out of our house and we were trying to find a new one. And so we just stayed in this friend of ours, dad's, owned this little flat. So we stayed in there. We got the two kids who were like really young. I think we just had Isabel, so she was like really young. But it was, it was awful. So we're staying in this sort of godforsaken little flat up these stairs. It was above a cafe. And above us, there were these other stairs that went up, and there was this weird couple there. Like one of them, we always saw the wife. She was always stunk of booze. It was like every time we talked to her, she would talk to you, and you were like, man, 9 o'clock in the morning, she stink of vodka. You were like, bloody hell, you got started early. And she was always hammered, taking the dog for a walk. See her in the morning. And then we met the guy. In passing, they just used to go up this dark staircase outside, and we'd meet him sometimes. And I remember him once saying, "Oh, do you want to come upstairs into the flat?" And I was like, And it's, "Oh, we've made some nice bread. You can have some of this bread." And it was just real creepy. And I kept thinking, if we go up there, there's going to be bodies. There's going to be bodies on meat hooks, definitely. So we didn't go. Anyway, about 4 years after we'd moved out of there. I was in the newspaper. We suddenly saw that there'd been this murder. This dude had killed this guy with a chainsaw down by Morrison's, down by the shop down the way, and left him in this field. And after some weird argument they'd had, but he killed him with this chainsaw. And then it turned out it was the guy upstairs. So Turns out it was a chainsaw murderer. So I think we'd, yeah, our instincts were right with that one. There you go, top Donny banter. You need to write a book, Matt. Yeah, yeah. Right, I need to get moving. Keep it moving. So yeah, I'll get moving. And hi Matt, any thoughts on what might begin with Talking Bass if one just finished up with Josh's Beginner to Badass? Probably. I need to get Josh's Beginner to Badass because I can't tell how far you're going to be on based on that. But I think you will probably be good with either Chord Tone Essentials or Groove Trainer. I've seen some people say after finishing that they liked Groove Trainer because it's kind of a progressive thing that takes you up to a kind of, a fairly decent standard with grooves. They're basically etudes, but it's just little 2, 4, 8 bar grooves. Incredibly simple, and then gradually get the 60 in volume 1, 60 in volume 2, and they just gradually get more and more difficult over time until you're playing sort of like, typical, 16th note funk grooves, ghost notes, and all that stuff. That's what you get up to. But Chord Tone Essentials, if you want to do the theory stuff, Chord Tone Essentials is the one. Good thing you didn't grab that bread. Yeah, I know. That's what we said. That bread could have been the death of us. Chainsaw. Yeah, I couldn't believe it when I found out that. It was like the most shocking thing that had ever happened on the Isle of Wight, because there's never anything happens here. Not like where I'm from. But on the Isle of Wight, don't get anything. And all of a sudden, chainsaw murder, and it was the dude living upstairs. Still see her kicking about. She takes her dog for a walk. I still see her walking around, hammered. Not hammered. I mean drunk. Hammered. Yeah, he had his chainsaw and he got an hammer as well. Oh my god, we've got ZZ Top going on next door as well now. Way too fast. Sharp dressed man. 200 beats per minute. Don't know if you've already explained it, but how to apply the pentatonic scale in a solo over a certain chord. Right, okay, so I can't go into that because I'm going to be here forever and I'm getting off. But the stuff that I talked about in terms of, so when you're playing a major 7, arpeggio or whatever, you can also, if you know what scale is applied to it, you can actually create a pentatonic scale out of that. So basically, over a major scale, if you take the 7th out and you take out the 4th, you get the major pentatonic. So over that C major 7, you can do the same thing that you did with the chord tones. We're just taking out the 7th and the 4th. See, it's just a pentatonic. But again, you still want to be aware of what you're gonna cadence onto, what the final note's gonna be that you land on. So you just apply all the same stuff, but with a pentatonic. And then for the A minor that I played, so let's go back to the A minor. You could use the A minor pentatonic. Kind of writes itself, really, doesn't it? So if I'm playing over, so there's the A minor. So you could use the A minor pentatonic. And of course with minor pentatonics and major pentatonics, because it's all like 2-finger, it's so easy to play like faster lines. it's all that kind of stuff because it's just 2 fingers. And then bring in that Dorian. So you get the idea. But you just use pentatonics in place of those scales. So start with chord tones and then just add the scales, and then you can also bring in the pentatonics into play. But it's all, again, just based on the chord tone framework. Don't grab that bread. Don't grab that bread. Chainsaw. Don't grab that bread. Cool. Okay then. So I don't know if you've already. Oh yeah. So I'll get moving. Keep it moving, and I will. Well, when's the next one? Saturday. So I'll be doing another one on Saturday, I think. Okay. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for the email for that, and I will see you all hopefully on Saturday.